LEP board meeting of the 14th of July. For those who don't know, it's Roger Marsh speaking. A couple of protocols. If you're not speaking, can you please go on mute so as to restrict bandwidth? And whilst I'll endeavour to follow the chat, I know Julie's going to do that and help me with that. If you wish to come in, can you please raise your physical hand, and I'll ensure that people get the chance to come in as appropriately. As I said, welcome, and look forward to a fairly full discussion. I should say at the outset that whilst the meeting is scheduled from now 1 o'clock till 4, it is my intention, subject to the extent of the discussion, perhaps around one or two of the agenda items, particularly in relation to the carbon dioxide emission pathway paper, which was separately sent out, that we would look to finish around 3:15 or thereabouts. But as I say, I don't want to foreshorten, I should say, a conversation about some particular areas. I have received a number of apologies, and there are people in substitution. An apology from Councillor Hinchcliffe where there is no substitution. Apologies from Councillor Jeffrey, but I think Councillor Hemingway is with us. An apology from Councillor Aspin, but I think Councillor Andrew Waller is attending as a guest. And I've also had an apology from Tom Reardon, and there's a few no responses, but I'm expecting they may well be joining us soon. I've noted that Rashid Palmer and Cooley and Richard Cooper need to leave by 2 o'clock. So completely understand. And if there are any questions that we haven't addressed, perhaps we can put those in the chat box. So I think we'll move to agenda item 2, Ruth, unless I've missed anything, have I? No, it doesn't look like I have. Any declarations of interest that people want us to record in addition to those we already know about? So I'll just pause there. Okay, I think that's Ruth. You're on mute. Sorry, Ruth, did you want to come in?
Yes, Simon Pringle put his hand up, Roger. I'm not sure if he needed to say something.
I missed him. Simon, sorry, come in, please.
No problem at all. It's more for transparency than a true declaration of interest, but I'm now an associate fellow of Chatham House. I'm now participating in Chatham House research and other things, so it's best just for that to be noted, that's all.
Oh, well, I think importantly, congratulations, Simon, from us all in that important grouping. And I should have, and forgive me, Peter Muckler, I should have formally welcomed you as our senior sponsor in Whitehall. So welcome to you, Peter. Moving to agenda item 3, exclusion of press and public. I'm not aware there's anything, Ruth, that we need to exclude the press and public from in terms of our discussions and any decisions we're about to make. I'll move to agenda item 4, the minutes of our last but first Zoom meeting of 10th of June. Can I just check before seeking your approval as to whether any matters anybody wants to raise in relation to those minutes? And if so, please could you raise your hands and I'll do my best to come to you. I can't see anybody raising any hands. So then can I, with a show of hands, seek your approval that they're an accurate record of our debate, discussion and decisions of the meeting of the 10th of June? You raise your hands and approve? Yep, people are. I think now moving to you, Alan, on agenda item 5, economic reporting.
I'm going to hand to
somewhere else. You're going to hand somebody else, sir.
I'm going to hand to James Hopton, if that's all right, please.
That's absolutely fine. And just to share, James, we've allowed about 15 minutes for this agenda item. Clearly, we can go over and under depending on what colleagues on the call wish to do. So over to you, James.
Thanks, Chair. So yeah, hi everyone. I just thought I'd run through the headlines in the report, but also a couple of other things that have kind of developed since then as well. So one of the main headlines and focus for a lot of us is obviously around what happens with unemployment. So we've got data now up to the end of May covering the number of people claiming benefits, principally because they're out of work. There was a increase of almost 19,000 in May in West Yorkshire. So that's an increase of about 22% compared to April. The increases we've seen locally are a bit lower than we've seen across the country as a whole, but nonetheless, there are about 50,000 more people claiming out of work benefits now than there were in March. So there's about 107,000 people claiming those types of benefits in West Yorkshire as of the end of May. We've also had data now at the local level. We've got official data on the number of people who've been furloughed, again, up to the end of May. That shows in West Yorkshire that there were about 256,000 people furloughed by the end of May, and across the wider Leeds City region geography, there were around 344,000. So that's about 28% of all jobs in the area that have been furloughed, and that proportion is quite similar across the area and nationally. Again, we should be getting updated data on that later this week, but I think it's fair to say from the anecdotal evidence we're getting from the conversations that people in the growth service are having with businesses, it's fair to say that businesses are now bringing people back from furlough, but that process seems quite slow. Clearly, there's a lot of variation within sectors. Areas of manufacturing and construction have moved quite quickly, I think, to bring people back from furlough, but as you would expect, areas around hospitality and the kind of leisure and culture industries have been much slower to move that, and that obviously reflects the timing of when those types of businesses are able to reopen within the guidelines that have been set out by government. So it's definitely a kind of mixed picture on that. And I think the other thing it's worth emphasising is that as well as the sector that businesses operate in directly, businesses are heavily influenced by those that they serve. So, you know, there are construction businesses whose main clients are in the retail sector, for example, and they are still seeing quite low demand from their clients, and that's then affecting their decisions around when they kind of bring people back. And in some cases, refurlough staff as well, if demand kind of ebbs and flows. If businesses have furloughed staff previously, they are now able to refurlough them week by week, and we are seeing businesses take advantage of that at the moment. We've also recently completed our quarterly economic survey that we've done with the Chambers of Commerce in the City region for a number of years. That showed a record drop in activity in Q2. Again, that's very much in line with national surveys, so doesn't come as a complete surprise, but just give us some insight into how local businesses have been affected by the lockdown. So as I say, a drop of around 60% in domestic activity, and a significant number of businesses saying their cash flow position has worsened over that 3-month period. That said, some of the more recent data locally and nationally has suggested that we may have kind of reached the kind of low point of the downturn. People may have seen ONS have released some GDP data for May today, which showed an increase of 1.8% in output in May, but over the course of the past 3 months, it's still showing a decline of around 19%. So although we're starting to see a slight uptick in activity, generally speaking, activity remains a long way from where it was 3 months ago. That's reflected in some things we're seeing locally around things like job vacancies, where we've seen something of an improvement in the past few weeks, but that has kind of tailed off a little bit as well in the last week or two. And we're currently seeing around 10 out of work benefit claimants per available vacancy locally, so that gives a bit of a level of insight into the kind of balance of supply and demand in the labour market. The quarterly economic survey we've done with the Chambers of Commerce has also allowed us to look at how businesses have responded to the crisis. And we've seen around 80% of businesses have put in place measures to kind of enable their staff to work within social distancing guidelines, for example, and put in place measures to help staff get to work safely and those kind of things. Generally speaking, around 3/4 of businesses expect those measures to be in place for anything between 3 and 12 months. The one outlier on that is around home working. I think we may have touched on this a little bit at the last board meeting, but it's only around 60% of businesses who think that the measures they've put in place to allow more home working might be kind of removed within 12 months. Around a fifth of businesses think that's a permanent change for them going forward, and a further 9% think it will last for longer than a year. So there's around a third of businesses who think that those measures will be in place for longer than a year. The final thing I wanted to mention, again, I think I touched on last time that we'd commissioned Experian to undertake some modelling of different scenarios for what may happen in terms of economic impacts as a result of COVID-19. We've now got the headline results of that, and they are covered in the paper, so I won't go through them in detail, but just to highlight that across the three scenarios which kind of model what might happen with the rate at which kind of activity recovers, they suggest anything between a 10% and 22% drop in economic output over the course of 2020, and a fall of employment between 30,000 and 58,000 jobs, which is a drop of between 2.5% and 4.8% in employment. And as you might expect, the rate at which we see a recovery does also vary significantly across those scenarios, and that's quite closely linked to what happens in terms of the prevalence of the virus and the likelihood of a second wave and further lockdowns as we move later into the year and into the winter. So in the most optimistic scenario, the unemployment rate would return to where it was pre-lockdown in the second half of 2021. And in the most pessimistic scenario, that wouldn't happen until 2027. So the range of potential outcomes remains quite high, or very high, it's fair to say. And I think, again, that's reflected in the analysis that the Office for Budget Responsibility have released this morning, which again shows a fall in their kind of core scenario, or an increase in unemployment up to around 12%. But again, some quite wide ranges of potential impacts, even at that national level. So even as we've kind of moved through the lockdown period and activity is reopening, I think that the range of potential outcomes still remains quite high. So we're going to continue to keep a close eye on what the likes of OBR are saying, and continue to work through those scenarios with Experian, and I guess continually review our kind of judgment on the probability of those scenarios, which will help to inform the recovery plan that colleagues will come on to in the next item. So that's all I really wanted to cover for now, but happy to take any questions.
Yeah. No, thank you, James, and that does very adequately set the scene for the item we'll go to shortly. I should also flag, I think, is it mid-August or thereabouts, the Bank of England's going to give the Monetary Policy Committee is going to give their latest view on the shape of the recovery based on scenarios. I think I'm correct in that regard. Shall I just pause and invite any, and if Alan wanted to add anything, do you want to add anything, Alan, or should we go to any questions or comments from colleagues?
Nothing from me at this point.
Okay, any questions or comments based on what James has shared with us? The challenges of planning in this context are very great. But anyway, any comments anybody wanted to add? And I did notice, Peter, that you did have your hand up. I think it might have been from an earlier item. If it was, forgive me, but if it's for this item, please proceed.
Thank you, Roger. Yeah, it was for this item, and thanks for your earlier welcome. And thanks very much for the team for the report. Clearly, there is I mean, the last comment was right. There's a high range of uncertainty around depth and duration and pattern of the downturn. It was notable last week. Chancellor made a statement. Treasury didn't publish their own figures or projections on that. Clearly regarded that as a foolhardy venture at the moment. But there are a couple of things I would be interested in hearing a little more about if there is intelligence. I mean, the first is there a very clear early sign of sort of sectoral differentiation, perhaps particularly the impact on some of the LEP priority areas, advanced manufacturing, health, green economy, transportation. Be interested in that, and I suppose secondly, any immediate reaction that people can see in terms of confidence or not in relation to the Chancellor's announcements last week. There's quite a lot in there around young people and around jobs, Kickstarter, incentive for apprenticeships, etc. So I'll be interested in whether that sort of cut through yet, or it's too early to say.
Before I bring James in, perhaps to respond to it, I would say certainly from the businesses I've spoken to regard the Chancellor's summer statement, clearly all welcome such support as can be given as we start to rescue the recovery. Some questions around whether some of the amounts that are on offer will actually achieve their end objectives. And I guess everybody quite rightly understands that a bigger set of proposals will come in the early autumn with the budget and the spending review. So I think the message that I've received, but I'll see what other colleagues have to say on that, is that generally continue to welcome the support, but recognising that we need to get back to whatever the new normality is as soon as we are able. I'll just pause, see if anybody else wanted to add anything, because there are obviously a number of business colleagues are on the LEP board, whether they wanted to add anything further to that remark that I've just made, and then we'll go back to James. I'll pause there. I don't see anybody intimating what's something in the chat room.
Sorry, Roger, could I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to ask about within the scenario planning, what would happen if sort of one of the cities was to revert back into lockdown, and what sort of impact? So if Bradford, which apparently has been at risk of that, what would be the impact of that on the wider region, and how would it affect the sort of scenario planning if it was just one place within the region?
I guess I'm going to look to. I'm going to take a couple of questions together, I think, if I may. I think you wanted to come in as well, Shirley, didn't you?
Yes, Roger. Do you want me to do that now?
I think you might as well. Let's get the 2 or 3 questions together, and then between Alan and James, we'll cover it, because what we are straying into, understandably, is actually the recovery thinking that we're going to have a fairly substantive item on. But so if you want to come in, Shirley, please do.
It was just a question on the employment hub. In the paper, it sort of outlined the number of enquiries they've had, 277 from individuals and 19 from businesses, and it didn't seem very large numbers to me. And I'm just wondering, I don't know much about the employment hub, but and what investment is in there, and whether we're maximising it to its full extent. And the second question was really maybe for the next item, which was how we're going to think about how we might use the package that's been announced from the Chancellor about the arts and culture.
Sure.
Yeah.
I was going to say, let's hold that second question. And Mark Roberts wanted to come in. So you want to come in, Mark, now, and we'll deal with these together, as I said.
And not so much a question, sort of more of a comment. And I sort of note that the paper is focusing a lot on sort of overall trends and sectoral differences. I just really wanted to stress the impact on SMEs in particular versus some sort of large companies. And I'm quite connected to sort of various SMEs and entrepreneurs in the area. And I think, a few things. Firstly, cash flow is impacting everyone. For SMEs, that's much more acute than others. I think, you know, we were in the business communications group sort of meeting yesterday, and some feedback in particular around small businesses was saying, you know, to the Chancellor's plans, you know, the job retention bonus is great and very welcome, but for a small business, £1,000 in February is quite a long time to wait when payroll is often quite a high proportion. And I think also looking at the hospitality sector, you know, where, you know, unless you get to about an 80–90% capacity rate, sometimes it's not viable. That impacts a lot of small businesses. And you know, I think something else that's come up is in this time of everyone managing cash flow, small businesses can often be the suppliers of larger companies. And as larger companies try to manage cash flow, that can have the unintended consequence of really hurting the cash flow of a small business. So I just wanted to sort of make everyone aware of the SME sort of plight within this particularly.
Yeah, well, point well made, Mark. And I think there are challenges around how to rescue as much as we can. And I think the Chancellor and others have been to be commended on what they've done to preserve what we had, but also not so much put off the evil day, but recognise that not everything can come through as it went into this. Alan, James, do you want to come back to those 2 points? One that Amir raised, if it doesn't cut across what we're going to talk about under the next agenda item, and also the one that Shirley raised on the employment hub. I don't know who's going to come in. Are you going to come in, Alan?
I think so. The question about what impact a local lockdown would have on the overall scenario planning, I would probably defer to James, except to say that I don't think that the scenario planning work that we have undertaken would clearly there are a limited number of scenarios that we can develop, and so it wouldn't go into that kind of level of granular detail. Clearly, we're going to come on to a minute to talk about the regional recovery plan. There will be local plans being developed as well in individual areas, and some thinking will need to go into them about what happens when there is a local lockdown and how those are managed. And local areas have their own plans in place for how they would manage local lockdowns and local outbreaks. On the culture point, I can come back to when we talk in a minute about the plan. Yeah. I don't know if James wants to say anything else about the scenarios, apart from what I just said.
I mean, I think that's probably right, Alan. So the kind of most severe scenario we've looked at is essentially a scenario where we've looked to model the impacts of further lockdowns at some point later this year. So I appreciate that's a slightly different question to the local lockdown, but ultimately that will give us a sense of how the different scenarios impact locally. And it may be that, you know, none of these scenarios will be 100% accurate as you'd expect, and it may be that different places, you know, do see slightly different trajectories, and one scenario is closer to the accurate picture in one place compared to another. I think where I think from my perspective, there's an additional challenge around local lockdowns is where we've seen in you know, the first example in Leicestershire, they have locked down quite a wide area, and as more kind of commuting is starting to recover, then clearly a lockdown in one place will have a knock-on effect in other places. So our modelling hasn't, unfortunately, allowed us to get down to that level of detail, but I think we do need to be aware of some of those issues, and we've done quite a lot of work in recent years to understand things like commuting flows in the region, and clearly those patterns have been heavily disrupted lately, but that gives us another opportunity to understand how a local lockdown in one area may affect others. So I think there is some more work for us to do on just kind of understanding that in a bit more detail so we can be on the front foot.
Thank you, James. We'll come back to the hub question in a moment because I might want to bring Rashik in. Mandy, you wanted to come in. Mandy Ridyard.
Thanks, Roger. And Peter mentioned a couple of things. One of them was about sectoral differences. So I work in advanced manufacturing, as do a number of other companies in the region that I know of, specifically in aerospace. And whilst the government's job retention scheme is very welcome, where we have pivoted to help the government manufacture ventilators, We now have an order book that has a much longer delay on it. And so we're just starting to have our demand disappear now. So with the job retention scheme being date-based rather than time-based, I think for advanced manufacturing that can sometimes be an issue, especially for SMEs, as Mark said. And one of the other things with the CBILS loan is that where large companies are taking that, I think they should be obligated to sign up to the prompt payment code to make sure that there is liquidity within the supply chain. Secondly, with the summer statement, the Chancellor mentioned a lot of support for apprentices, which was really welcome. But one area that was completely missed out were apprentices in role. So where you have first or second year apprentices in role that may unfortunately lose their positions throughout SMEs in the region, what happens to them? And in terms of the levelling up agenda, if you're at university, you may be slightly paused, but you will still be able to continue your qualification. If you lose your job as a current apprentice, then you're back to square one. So I think it's really important that we look at support for in-role apprentices at the moment.
Thank you, Amanda. I wonder, Brian Archer's on, whether he has any comment to make on that and also the employment hub point before I go to Councillor Waller. Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm just picking up on some of the points that Peter raised earlier in terms of feedback from business with regards to the Chancellor's announcement. I think, you know, the traineeship announcement of £1,000 a place and the additional 2,000 for apprenticeships was broadly welcomed by the business community. But there were some concerns raised by training providers, certainly the FE sector and the universities. And I know that the Institute of Fiscal Studies published a report just last week saying that 13 universities across the UK were facing insolvency because of the lack of foreign student numbers. And just at a local level, because of the fall in apprentices, there's a local FE college that has seen a £2 million reduction in apprenticeship numbers. And as a consequence, they're obviously looking at restructuring and reducing staffing numbers. So I do think there's definitely a need to focus on the supply side as well as the demand side. I think the point made about enrolled apprentices and having a safety net in place for enrolled apprentices is really, really important. There was another point raised about access to finance. And I think getting public sector organisations to sign up to the prompt payment code will help. It's pleasing to see that the volume of bounce back loans and CBILS has increased significantly, and I think that's helped the situation. And also the uptake of grants. We've seen increasing demand for business grants for capital investment. Things like the Digital Enterprise Programme and such like will help. And the LEP's just put in an ask for a further 7 million to support capital grants programmes. I think it was Shirley that mentioned the employment hub and the volumes and the value of that service. It's a £9 million ESF programme, and it's targeted at up to 6,000 young people ages 15 to 24, and it's aimed at matching them up with employment and training opportunities. I do think we need to look at how we're marketing that service and how we ramp it up. James mentioned that we've got 344,000 people on furlough at the moment. There's a high probability that, well, that's about a third of our workforce in the Leeds City region. There's a high probability that anything up to 20% of those people will end up unemployed and redundant. And I think we need to make sure that we've got a rapid response in place, working with partners like Job Centre Plus to provide some kind of safety net to support those individuals, not just through the employment hub, but through other routes. And we're also doing some work on identifying those larger employers as well as SMEs in key sectors that are most at risk, so we can, target our interventions more effectively. I'll stop at that, Chairman.
Thank you. Before I bring in Councillor Waller, can I just bring in Helen? Forgive me, Andrew. Helen, I think you wanted to just follow on something Mandy said, so I don't want to lose the thread of it, just in case.
Yes, thank you. It was just about sectoral differences, really, and just to flag that in the arts and culture sector, and it will be the same for hospitality, because we're having to operate on such reduced capacity numbers, we're not going to be profitable for a very long time. And so obviously some will be able to take that risk slightly more than others. And I think there was some talk of trying to get furlough extended for particular sectors. And I just wondered whether there was any more on that. And also I just wanted to flag the levelling up agenda, and particularly with regard to the next item as well.
Thank you. Can we bring, unless there's an immediate response, Alan or Brian, on that furloughing point for the hospitality and tourism sector? I don't know whether you wanted to add anything, Brian, or not.
Nothing to add on that, Chairman. I'm not aware of any additional plans to extend furlough for the hospitality sector. Although the government on Wednesday announced the Culture Fund, which is a £1.6 billion fund to support arts venues, theatres, galleries, museums, and other cultural venues. I think £880 million of it was grant support, and the balance was loan support. But the detail of that has not been announced yet, so we're not clear yet on the mechanism for accessing that funding. But we're expecting an announcement on that imminently.
Thank you, Brian. And Helen, obviously with one of my other hats on, I'm well aware of the challenges of the cultural and tourist sector. You know, if I think about some of the things we're facing with the Peace Hall as an example, so I'm aware of it. So we'll be obviously following these up as we can, and perhaps pick them up in the recovery paper. Councillor Waller, you've waited patiently. Would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. It'll be unsurprising that I would like very much from York's perspective to back up the support needed for the hospitality and tourist industry, which will be at reduced capacity going forward. Also, to pick up on Mark Roberts' points about SMEs, and there are a significant number that have missed out on support, and there are businesses that have not yet had a date by which they can reopen, and they are beginning to wonder if they're being completely left behind. So I think that there are some sectoral issues that it would be helpful to collectively across the region to support those businesses that could be kept going. It's just that they are at a very difficult time at the moment, and there are a few attractions. The 51k cut-off point in grants has caught a few businesses off, and so they've been looking at their contribution through business rates over the last decade or whatever, and saying, well, actually, we've contributed to UK PLC just at the time we need a bit of support. They're just not getting it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. We'll pick up some of these points about sectors and other things in the next item. But I wonder, Peter, I've just seen a good note from you to Mandy regarding apprentices in role. Is it worth you just sharing more widely, or is it, or should we perhaps move on? But I'll give you the opportunity if you wanted to just comment over and above what you put in the chat room, Peter.
I mean, I don't want to tell you too much longer, but we are very cognizant of the risks to redundant apprentices. That said, they are people who have a lot of attraction to other employers, so we'll hopefully be able to support rebrokerage. But we've also found that many employers who are making redundancies seek to protect their apprentices because of the investment that is made in them. But we recognise that inevitably, as the job retention scheme unwinds, there will be more, and we'll do our best to support them, including brokerage into new roles where that's possible, and a support and advice service, and enabling them to continue their apprenticeship while unemployed, where that's practical for them to do so for up to 6 months, and in many cases, hopefully to complete. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Peter. I think we'll now move to, with your agreement, we'll move to the next agenda item, number 6. And I guess as that discussion that we just had exemplifies how difficult it is with such a wide range of scenarios to develop to develop a coherent and comprehensive plan, particularly for an economy that in very many respects is a microcosm of the whole UK. But nonetheless, we need to come forward with our compelling offers that obviously attract a significant level of financial asks to deliver. And to deliver, in my mind, as somebody involved in the Economic Recovery Board, but importantly, not so much an equilateral triangle, but we need to remember there are three sides to our challenge: the economic side, the social side, and all of the implications, and continuing to pursue our inclusive growth agenda. But above all, not above all, but importantly as well, maybe it is an equilateral triangle pictorially, to do so recognizing all of the environmental and other challenges. So perhaps by way of introduction, Alan, do you want to come in to share where we are? Because we're fairly well advanced in our thinking and our dialogue, and also the socializing of where that thinking's got to. So over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Chair. If it's okay, I'll just say a couple of words, and then if, with your permission, if Ian could say a little bit more in slightly more detail about where we've got to, I think that would be helpful for the board. So the Economic Recovery Board's been meeting fortnightly for the last few weeks. Alongside the development of the plan, we've also been having conversations with each of the panels, which most of you will have been involved in. Your input into that has been really appreciated. There are a couple of things that we're trying to do with the plan. One is to set out at a regional level what action we think needs to be taken in order to help the economy to be rescued, recover, and then build resilience in a number of scenarios. The second is to create a set of compelling asks and offers for government in order to inform decisions that we know that the Chancellor is going to have to make over the next few months, both in September and then in the run-up to the spending review as well. And so part of what we're trying to do here is to shape a conversation with government so that we're in the best position to access further investment later on. So the summary of where we've got to in the plan is set out in the paper. Broadly speaking, we've tried to make it focused as much as possible on people, and therefore there is a real focus in there on skills, on jobs and employment opportunities, growing businesses, and finally finally infrastructure. But throughout the plan as well, there are threads of tackling inequalities and reducing carbon as well, so that when we are focusing on those three priority areas, the way that we go about it is done with those overarching aims in mind. I think it would be helpful if Ian just said a few words as well, Chair, if that's okay.
Yes, just before I bring, thank you, Alan. Just before I bring in Ian, for the benefit of board colleagues, in developing our recovery thinking, we are trying to recognise the rescue of the here and now, the opportunities for reimagining and perhaps developing a wider innovation-driven entrepreneurial economy and into new areas that opportunity does allow. And thirdly, and importantly, how to put in a degree of resilience into our economic planning thinking against this. Back to one of Amir's points, not much a second wave, but also any other things that may come along. So without saying any further, can I invite Ian Smythe, who I hope's on the call somewhere, to just give an update, a bit more of update of the thinking, and perhaps then we'll just quickly move to some questions, because we're almost there on this. There'll never be a wrong or right answer. There'll never be a finished article, but there will be iterations even after the fact we finalise this particular version of our economic recovery thinking. Ian.
Thank you. If I'll just pick up a few of those themes that you and Alan have highlighted. I think firstly, just to repeat, the approach to the plan has gone under a huge amount of change over the last 4 weeks or so, as we've been talking to the panels that many of you are involved in, and part of the purpose of this paper today is to get on record. By necessity, some of those conversations have been, we haven't managed to have public sittings of the panels to discuss this, but we've had some workshops, and this paper gets on record the points that the panels have input to discussion. So thank you for everyone's input on those. Where the thinking has of the board has moved, as Alan outlined, is where we started with 5 priority areas with kind of quite siloed lists of proposals sitting under each of those priorities, split up into the 3 phases that Roger outlined: some short-term rescue, some medium-term reimagining, and longer-term resilience. Where we've moved to now is to focus on those 3 priorities that Alan highlighted, where really everything we do around businesses and creating for business growth and business resilience is really looked at through the lens of the jobs that they sustain and create as being the first priority. The second priority being the skills and training that underpins people's ability to get good jobs, and thirdly the infrastructure required to ensure that people can participate in the economy in various types of infrastructure needed for that. That has left the clean growth priority and inclusive growth as important cross-cutting goals, and we had a long conversation with the Green Economy panel to get endorsement to that approach, to make sure that we were still able to evidence through the use of success indicators and clearly putting a package of measures within those priorities that we could really clearly articulate how this furthers those agendas. And how we've done that further is to create recognising that many of the issues we highlight apply equally across the whole country, to really pull out the things that are specific to West Yorkshire, the things that are both challenges to West Yorkshire, but also the key opportunities and offer that we can make to the country. And we are developing 4 propositions that support those wider priorities, but are more detailed looks at the issues and opportunities under those propositions. So the first one being around health innovation, secondly around entrepreneurship, thirdly around digital as a way of enhancing people's lives in its widest sense. So a big theme of digital inclusion running through that proposition, what's required from a skills point of view, and also what's required from an infrastructure point of view to make sure everyone can participate in the digital economy. And then lastly, a detailed proposition around our ambitions around a net zero economy. And we will use those as to really open doors into government, to underpin conversations with government about if there's money to be spent in West Yorkshire, these are the things that we think it should be spent on, and where there is key opportunities to improve prospects of people around the region, and something we can offer back to the country. Couple of things that people brought up in the previous discussions. Clearly, there's a very significant interaction with the government's wider support on many of those things that might be relevant at a regional level, like the arts and culture package. We're still haven't seen the full detail of what that might mean for us, and we need to be flexing our plans over the coming weeks and months to respond to as we get that detail. And there will be a clear role for this plan of filling the gaps of where we see the government aren't stepping up and filling things. So I think the point that Mandy pulled out about apprenticeships who are already in role, that was brought up at the business communications group earlier in the week. That's one very clear gap. And also support to older people. I think generally people have welcomed the focus that the government has given on younger people, but are questioning what more can we do for older people. And then as the discussion with James's paper on the economic evidence, clearly we're considering three scenarios within the plan. We don't know quite where we are. It's very early days in understanding exactly which one of those scenarios, and we will need to return to that over the coming weeks and months as more evidence emerges, and also, as Alan says, as more of our local authority partners develop their plans. So we're expecting to take this plan to the next combined authority meeting on the 27th of this month, but fully expecting that through into the autumn we'll need to come back with a further version of the plan to reflect all the points I've just mentioned.
Thank you, Ian. I guess my perspective before. Perhaps Ian, if you just look at the chat room from Amir and Kate Hainsworth, who's had to leave us unfortunately, perhaps you could address those in a moment. Is to make sure that our plan is as attractive and compelling, but above all as realistic as we can make it, such that it stands out from the crowd. It builds on our strengths, but attempts to deal with the challenges that are facing us, not only economically, but socially and environmentally. And on behalf of all of this board, I'll be wanting to make sure that the narrative is clear, that why a pound spent with us is a pound well spent as compared to elsewhere. But as Ian said, we are ensuring that all of the panels and as wider community of this board are involved in this regional recovery plan, and that it does align as best as we can with the district ones as too. So Ian, do you want to pick up those couple of points in the chat bar, and then I'll bring Amir back in a moment. Ian.
Sorry, Roger, I'm tracking through the chat bar as I've been talking. Which of the particular points you'd like me to pick up?
Amir raises
Amir's one, yeah,
an issue around, I guess, disadvantaged communities, and then, as I say, towards the end, Kate's made a point about the third sector.
Okay, I can't actually see the one from Kate actually, but I'll pick up Amir's point. So one of the things that has really helped in this development process is this moving the whole focus on good jobs, which is a strong part of our inclusive growth, inclusive growth framework, which has been discussed at the inclusive growth panel, making that a key part of the first priority around jobs and resilient businesses. There was a big discussion at the Economic Recovery Board last week about how we make that real in terms of what's the balance between carrots and stick, I guess, for want of a better phrase, for businesses. How can we encourage businesses to come along on that agenda? But I think the transition point that you raise is really important, one that the Green Economy panel focuses on a lot, about the kind of the whole theme around the just transition and not actually making these moves too quickly. And that's been one of the biggest debates in developing the plan, about taking this as an opportunity to fundamentally redesign the economy and take advantage of new opportunities that are coming forward and build it on a clean growth agenda and the opportunities that brings, for example, versus the need for people to be rescued out of the current situation, the focus on just having a job, not necessarily the best job that they could get in the long term. So the plan tries to have that balance by having a range of proposals between those three phases that Roger outlined, but I think it's probably one of the key areas that we're going to need to see some movement between those phases and new ideas depending how the crisis develops.
Thank you, Ian. I think Andrew Wright wanted to come in. Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Roger. Thanks for speaking to the panels, and it's really good to see the summary, that the inputs that have been given and how they're being picked up, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the plan that comes out, and I think it's going to be exciting. There's quite a lot of good, new, energetic things being proposed there. In our input from the big panel, we talked about a need for a step change in the regional plan. I'm just wondering how we might articulate how that's being achieved. And you may have already done it, or it may be something that we could ask for, maybe in subsequent iterations, but some flavour of how much energy we're putting in that's different from what we were doing before, and maybe just the beginnings of a thought about how we might try and ask for more resources to back these ideas, rather than just accepting what's sent to us from the centre.
Good challenge, Andrew. Ian Shug-Allen want to comment back, as I think we are going to be ambitious but realistic in our offers, which then help scale our asks.
Yep.
Ian.
So I think a really important step forward are these detailed propositions that we've been developing to give that really compelling proposition about why we should be invested here. Specific asks around digital and around carbon, and I think that kind of demonstrates the not a wholesale change in the direction we wanted to go, but a real opportunity to step up and increase the ambition around what were already key themes for us.
Alan, did you want to add anything?
Can I just add to that? Because we're going to come on to talk about it when we get to the Green Economy Panel update. But I think some of the ambition that is a step change here is around the carbon agenda, where the ask that we're putting together relates very much to the emission reduction pathways work that we will come on to talk about, which sets out how tens of thousands of jobs could be created in this space. We heard from the Business Communications Group yesterday that some of that's going to be a real challenge, because particularly for what the Business Communications Group yesterday said, that particularly for manufacturers at this particular moment, investing in a shift towards more environmentally friendly processes, etc., was an investment that was challenging to make. But I think that the scale of requirement that is required to get to a net zero carbon economy is huge, and with the right level of investment could be an opportunity to create a large number of jobs. One of the things we'll come on to, for instance, is the Chancellor committed to funding for 700,000 homes to be retrofitted nationally. Well, we need to do that figure just in this region, and that leads to that is one example of how additional green jobs could be created. So I think there's, in terms of the size of the ask, the step change in ambition, the green agenda, the digital agenda, those asks are really developing well.
Thank you, Alan. Did Simon Pringle want to come in? Simon?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to pick up this theme under the under 7B, because but probably best to mention it now. Our panel meeting came too late. It was on the 7th of July to be included in the report, hence the separate circulation. But in respect to the economic recovery plan, I think we were very supportive of the move from there being a net zero sustainable economic recovery, moving from a pillar to a frame of reference, and we sought reassurance that it really was there to guide thinking and to be an overarching frame of reference, rather than it being demoted, and we were given that assurance very firmly, and that was welcomed. There was a very positive discussion, really touching on a number of the themes that have come through just now around thinking about the recovery on a systems level basis. It is we are a microcosm, it's a complex dynamic, and we do have this opportunity to really reimagine what growth looks like in our context, and what a just transition looks like. And with what effectively are shovel-ready projects, whether it's retrofitting of homes or looking at different types of infrastructure projects, there are a very considerable number of good quality, long-term enduring jobs available from this. So really weaving that into the ask, it's not just there to help deliver on the commitments we've made around net zero. It really is a fundamental part of the opportunity for a strong and enduring recovery.
I think thank you, Simon. I think the important point that's recognised at the top of government, and hopefully in policymakers' minds as well, is that the North as a region will be disproportionately affected by COVID in economic and other terms, and as a consequence needs to be disproportionately supported when it comes to taxpayer investment to re-establish the journey of growth. I'm just conscious that we could probably spend all of the meeting talking about this, just to see whether there are any really burning points anybody wants to raise before just moving and noting the recommendation on page 23 that really invites this board just to endorse the direction of travel. Does anybody else want to, any burning points they want to raise? If so, can I just ask Julie just to scan and see if anybody's raised hands that I might have missed?
So Cameron, would he like to, did he have a point?
Cameron, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, so it's kind of great to see what the panel's doing around economic recovery. I was reading an article in the Times recently by Daniel Finkelstein, and he was talking about this whole levelling up of the North. And one of the points he mentioned, he referenced, I think it's an economist called Richard Florida, who wrote The Creative Class. And he was writing about how areas that have prospered hugely in America, it's not necessarily been because big companies and big investment have gone there, and then people have followed them to get the jobs, but it's about areas which have had really creative economies, and they're seen as places where are exciting and interesting to live. And big companies go there, and then they get the workforce from the local population. And I think this particular economic strategy, it would be great to see a lot more around how arts, culture, and the creative and the innovation economies could be front and center of that. And I think, you know, being based in Bradford, one of the things we keep banging the drum about is a 50% population under the age of 25. And that population is increasingly wanting to have jobs that make a difference. So it ties perfectly in with the inclusive growth stuff, and it ties perfectly in with the green economy kind of work as well. And for me, it would be great to see that front and center, because I think the economic stuff's going to happen. But prior to the economic stuff, I think there's stuff around confidence and aspiration as a region that we need as well. And I think the second point is, you know, the National Lottery just announced over, you know, circa £20 million yesterday for support for the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. And one of the things that have come through in that with most of the funders, so it's the likes of Unlimited or Power to Change, you know, Spend Down endowments, they've put in front and center of their funds as a priority is about how we're supporting BAME communities. And I think we've got a case to be had that a place such as West Yorkshire, which has diverse communities, and I mean diverse in many ways, I think we should use that and be proud of that and be confident in using that when we're talking about levelling up. Yeah, well, the North has been disproportionately impacted, so we should disproportionately receive a higher amount. But then compared to other regions within the UK as well, there's higher rates of particular communities which need additional support. And I think it ties into Emma's point. My final point is just a question, really. I think there's some really great points in this draft. And when I joined the LEP, I made a commitment to myself that I don't want to be a gatekeeper in the communities that I'm working with, but how do I become someone who can help the flow of information? To what extent are we allowed to share that information with public? And would there be an appetite from any of the officers at the WICA if we arrange for them to just do a 45-minute kind of webinar where people can learn about this, to make sure that when we're talking about inclusive growth, as many people who could benefit from it know about it and learn about it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. Before I bring in Alan, particularly on that last point, what I would say, Cameron, and I think the first meeting is tomorrow, it's a task and finish group which I've set up to try and understand, particularly when it comes to BAME businesses and those business communities, how we better connect them with the various offers that this LEP has been and will be making for business growth. Point number one. Point number two, I think the work we've been doing in relation to MIT and the innovation-driven entrepreneurial aspects that we wish to inculcate into the city region will again help with that. But what we need to make sure behind creating those appetites is there's funding so as to develop the opportunities from ideas to globally significant businesses, not necessarily in one stroke, but hopefully, you know, a few ideas might spawn such businesses. Alan, did you want to come in before I bring in Councillor Pandor? Alan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Cameron. I mean, in relation to, firstly, really great, great points. about community involvement, building community knowledge, getting into a more consistent feedback loop. Absolutely fantastic, and we'd really welcome the opportunity to do as you said and convene some webinars with with whoever you'd like to suggest. Really, in terms of sharing the material, these are publicly available papers, and what's published you can share widely. In terms of the draft recovery plan, that'll go public sometime within the next week or so, and at that point you'll be able to share that as well.
Thank you. Shabir, do you want to come in?
Yeah, very quickly, Roger. Excellent points made by Cameron. He quite eloquently put in a few minutes what I've been trying to grapple for probably the best part of 2 years. You'll probably see my paper, which I don't want to say too much about, but it's actually refocusing how we move forward in the inclusive growth agenda. I'm not going to take all my thunder now, but you make some valid points, and I'll cover them in when I'm talking about my paper later on. But you're spot on. Thanks.
Thank you, Shabir. And as I say, it comes back, and I know this is a very simple picture, but the simple picture in my mind helps me with that equilateral triangle of economic, social, and environmental. And we've got to strike the right balances and expand accordingly. I'm conscious that time's ticking by. Unless there's any further burning points that we haven't covered, can I just draw people's attention to the recommendation on page 23 and just seek your confirmation that the direction of travel, the emerging economic recovery plan, meets with our approval at this juncture. And I'm just going to look for a few nods and perhaps thumbs up or otherwise, just to help me in that regard. Have I got a few nods and thumbs up? I haven't got any at the moment, so I'm not whether people can hear me or not.
You're getting lots of thumbs up, Roger.
Okay, I think I may be struggling with the internet here in downtown round here. Okay, thank you, Cameron, good man, and you have to rely on you. So shall we move on into the panel reports? And I'm keen to again make sure that we have enough time, but can we make them as punchy as we need to? The reports you've read, colleagues, any additional points? I'm going to go to Rashik if he's still with us. I'm not sure whether he might have gone. If he has, I may have to look to Brian Archer. But I'm particularly keen, Simon, under the green agenda, that a paper that we've subsequently circulated that was part of the recent panel meeting, that we have chance to have a dialogue about the emissions pathway approach, so that we get LEP board's input to something that's going to be discussed by the combined authority later this month. So Rashik, are you still with us? If not, I'm going to look to Brian to help me.
I believe he's gone, Roger.
Right. Brian, are there any particular points on the employment skills panel that you want to raise? And I'll start you off by wondering whether we'll be able to, at the away day, however that's constructed, and be able to discuss the sort of emerging refresh of the plan. And the second question is launch of a refresh plan early 2021 soon enough in all of the circumstances, in the light of the earlier conversations that we've had? Perhaps without stealing any of your thunder, I'll hand to you.
Thanks, Chairman. I mean, I'll pick up those points in a moment. I think I'll take the paper as read. I think the first thing I'd like to do is just put on record our thanks to Peter Mucklow for supporting us to get the transition funding turned around quite quickly for the AEB devolution. As part of the AEB devolution, £63 million devolution programme, we submitted a proposal for £1 million worth of transition funding, and Peter supported us to turn that around very quickly, which has enabled us to get into recruitment mode to get the team in place to manage that transition. And I'm pleased to say we've now appointed an AEB manager, Lindsay Daniels, who's got a really strong and powerful credentials for the job moving forward. And we're now in recruitment mode, pulling the team together. I mentioned earlier about the government announcements. As I say, they've been generally well received by the business community, but there is still some emphasis around and some concerns around apprenticeships and apprenticeship retention, which I don't propose to go over again. With regards to the strategy, I mean, obviously the draft AEB strategy has been published and out to consultation. Your point, Roger, Chairman, about refreshing the plan. I do think, and again, Alan might wish to come in on this, I do think there'll be a need to look at the timelines as to whether we bring that forward, particularly, you know, in the light of where we're at with COVID and the recovery plans. Alan?
Yeah, I think that's right, that we'll need to ensure that the new plan that we develop needs to be, you know, absolutely dovetail with the recovery plan. The recovery plan can be used to inform, and the evidence that's coming out can be used, and actually the interventions that are coming in from government as well all need to be fed into the development of the new employment and skills plan. The other thing that I'd say is that there is the work of the Skills Commission to think about here. As we, you know, as is well known, the skills system is, you know, pretty centralized, and we have been working through the Skills Commission, which some members of the board are on, for the last year or so, on development of proposals for a blueprint of alternative ways that the skills system could work. The AEB is what we would regard as a kind of first stage of devolution. We would hope that successful delivery of that would potentially lead to further development of devolution proposals as well. Yeah, that's what I say, is that this, alongside this work as it's being developed, we need to make sure that we are relating it back to the recovery plan work as well.
Thank you, Alan.
I should add, Chairman, as well, that we've had confirmation that we meet all the readiness conditions in terms of systems and processes. So we're now mobilising, you know, the team of subject matter experts around the project to make sure we've got, you know, I know it's an operational issue, but really important in terms of delivering the strategy, that we've got the right systems and processes in place, and the right core capabilities within the organisation, whether that's within legal or procurement. All of those things are in place to move smoothly forward with the transition.
Brian, harking back to some earlier comments about apprenticeships and young people generally, Para 2.8 talks about our levy transfer service, and maybe is there anything you wanted to add there, just to make sure that colleagues on the call and beyond are aware of us trying to use the current system as effectively as we can. And I think it was noticeable that the Chancellor made no reference to it in his summer statement. So do you want to come in, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of lobbying going on nationally to increase the cap on levy transfers, but the Chancellor chose not to do anything on that. But a lot of employers are still not aware that if they have unspent levy funds, they can be transferred. So I would urge board members and people within their network, if they are levy payers and they've got unspent levy, then there's an opportunity to transfer that and increase the uptake, and hopefully get more apprentices.
Maybe that's something we can take offline, Brian, as to what we might do in terms of wider communication. I think, Peter, you wanted to come in.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you, Roger. I mean, first of all, congratulations to all the work that's gone on here. On the adult education budget devolution, if there's anything else that needs sort of unblocking, you know, don't hesitate to get in touch and I'll see what I can do. On the careers, the remit of the National Careers Service was extended last week to include furloughed workers and 18 to 24-year-olds in education, and it may be that would enable some focus, some refocusing, and further prioritisation of the all age careers service here. But I did just want to say on the levy transfer work. I mean, first of all, I'm really interested in learning any lessons that we can from the Leeds City Region LEP West Yorkshire Combined Authority approach to this, because I think that, given what we're hearing around small and medium-sized enterprises on this call, but also what the data is telling us in relation to apprenticeships, whereby the decline in starts has been much more pronounced in small and medium-sized enterprises than in larger levy-paying organisations. That we should certainly be looking to expand the take-up of this facility. At the moment, very few employers it is little used, and one of the lessons that we may need, some of the lessons we may need to learn, maybe about process and how to make it easier. So I've been shooting further discussion with the team about how to do that, and it's something that we're talking to DFE and other ministers about centrally. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter. And Brian, perhaps you'll take that away and perhaps socialise it with Rashik and others on employment and skills. I think we'll move on. Are we happy to endorse the various recommendations on pages 33 and 34? And again, I'll look for some thumbs up, waving of hands or otherwise. And Julie can just check, because my screen's frozen, as to whether we've got that. We've got one from Cameron, so that's fine. Thank you, colleagues and others. Shall we move now, Simon, to the Green Economy Panel report? And obviously, we've shared, I think it's called Agenda Item 8 from the panel papers, and maybe you just introduce this item. But the objective is to get LEP board colleagues' input into something that will be discussed, as I said, by the combined authority towards the end of this month, and may well end up with a signed off way forward. And I was conscious that I wanted to make sure private sector members in particular had the chance, beyond being involved in the panels, to input. So Simon, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to expand on this. It's obviously been a substantive and very important piece of work. Our panel meeting, as I mentioned earlier, was on the 7th of July, so post-dated the publication date for this paper. I already mentioned that one of the other substantive items for that was our reflections on the good work that's gone into the economic recovery plan. Just for confusion's sake, both emissions reduction pathway and economic recovery plan have got the same 3-letter acronym, so I won't be referring to it as ERP. So as I mentioned, there are some constructive builds on the economic recovery plan already shared, very positive. We also had a presentation by invitation from the White Rose Forest to really bring us up to speed where that was. We wanted to do that in the context of the emissions reduction pathway, because, as colleagues will see, the potential for tree planting is a component part of all of the different pathways. So I'm going to say just a few words, and then Noel Collins is going to come into the call hopefully and just take us through it in a little bit more detail, just to set things up for any questions or conversation that colleagues would like. I think firstly I'd just note that it's the initial findings of the first task within the emissions reduction pathway. And that's to explore the three different decarbonisation pathways. You'll have read about those, all of which have an shared ambition to achieve the city region's net zero carbon 2038 target. And it also outlines certain common actions that appear in all of the pathways. So there are some differences, there are some areas of commonality, and they need to be co-designed with partners as the study continues. So to that end, what we're now doing is delivering on the commitment made in the last LEP board meeting, which was to seek a date to hold an open session for LEP board colleagues to really bring people up to the sort of same level of knowledge around the climate agenda and the carbon budget and the various complexities that underpin some of this work. There was a request that came from Roger and others last time to do that, and Jackie, I think, is getting close to a date that doesn't clash with anything else that we can work towards. Also scheduling different sort of deeper dive meetings with panels and panel chairs to really look at how the different areas of focus can be sort of co-created and co-led. So that work is underway. Place is happening fairly soon, I think, Alan, and then the and then the rest will follow in due course. There's no prioritization to it. It's really just about how the scheduling of different meetings will unfold. But those are going to be very important in terms of co-leadership. And so what you'll note from this, and when Noel goes through it in detail, is that it's all a challenge, and it's all a challenge from the baseline that we're working from. So it's all a challenge without any additional carbon loading from where we're starting from. It's complex, but it is packed full of opportunity as well. And so it can sometimes be tempting to look at it and go, gosh, this is just overwhelming. But actually, for all of these areas where substantial work and investment and focus is required, in the vast majority of instances, there will be economic activity, jobs, opportunities, apprenticeships, and new skills, and a better quality of life that will come from that. So the ask really here is for you to consider this, just to reflect upon it, and then recommend to the combined authority that the work proceeds to the next stage, which is indeed the recommendation that the Green Economy Panel has already made, alongside thanking our officer colleagues and others for a Herculean effort to get us to the stage that we are already. So Noel, I can't see you, so I'm trusting to the fates that you are on the call, and if you'd like to come in now and take us through it in a little bit more detail, that would be great.
I am here,
Simon. Simon, just a moment. No, before, sorry to intervene. I just wanted to thank you, Simon, and the Green Economy Panel. This is a very challenging and difficult topic, but as you rightly said, and I wanted to reinforce the point you made about the huge opportunities there are for us to embrace it as part of that wider economic thinking, and not just only recovery, but the reimagining and the resilience. So I just wanted to thank you all for that, and particularly, as I'm going to hand to him, to Noel and other officers who are doing quite a lot of, in my mind, groundbreaking work, but certainly forward-thinking work. So over to you, Noel.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm just going to spend maximum 5 minutes running you through some of the sort of key points from the report. I won't go through everything in that report. So as you will see from the document, it says we can get to our 2038 targets. As a reminder, that is to be net zero carbon by 2038, so we can get 100% of the way there. I don't think it'll come as a surprise to anybody that that will be challenging, and that's especially so within West Yorkshire because it is quite urban, and we also have a lack of land, and we have competing uses for our land which can take in carbon emissions from the air, so things like tree planting, peatland restoration, those types of things. We have limited land to be able to do that type of activity. But that being said, the work that we've had done, the modelling that we've had done by our consultants, is sort of suggesting to us that we'll get through the measures that have been modelled somewhere between 73% and 82% of the way towards the target that we've set. So that's a great sort of starting point for us. It'll be challenging. There is some really big ticket items there that I'll briefly touch on in the rest of sort of my conversation here. The remaining emissions side of this, we can get there through a combination of two ways. We can increase our ambition around particular measures that have been modelled. So a really good example of that is around remote working. So we feel that we've been quite conservative in the modelling with regard to the proportion that we think is achievable. Whereas the sort of the pandemic and the sort of national experiment around remote working maybe suggests that we can do more on that side of things, which will give us a greater emissions savings. The other area where we could hit our targets is through sort of innovative sort of emissions reduction technologies. So really looking at carbon capture and storage technologies, some really blue sky thinking around direct air capture of carbon emissions, those types of things, looking at what part they actually play and help to reduce our emissions. To get to the levels that we're talking about within this report, we are going to need the support and assistance from central government, and that will come in the form of needing funding support, but it'll also need that policy support as well. They need to make some really strong decisions around particular subjects. Heat decarbonisation is a real principal example of that. And also at all levels really, but especially sort of a regional, local level, we really need to play our part and have that highly ambitious leadership and policy development that'll drive forward these emission savings that we need to be achieving. What we're not doing at this point in time is recommending a preferred pathway to follow. There are too many uncertainties that are associated with some of the pathways, and do rely, as I've just said, on government making particular decisions. However, there are a basket of common actions that exist across all of the three pathways that have been modelled. And it really makes sense until the point at which we get greater certainty that we focus on those common actions. So as an example of what those common actions could be, I talked about the remote working side of things. So that is common to all of these pathways. So actually we could look at sort of driving forward and achieving greater levels of remote working. Another one, I think it was mentioned a bit earlier in the call, was around the retrofit of energy efficiency measures to homes. So that'll be needed regardless of the pathway that we go on. And we think through this work, we'll need to be retrofitting in the region of just under 700,000 of our homes within West Yorkshire to a level where they are energy efficient. To put that into context, there are just over 1 million homes within West Yorkshire itself. Other one there is a deployment of heat pump technologies as well. So a certain level, I think it's up to sort of 300,000 is sort of a level that we need to be looking at as a common action across all these pathways. Put into context again, there's less than 1,800 heat pump systems that are installed in West Yorkshire at this moment in time. Just to reiterate, I think Simon made the point, this is just the results of task one. So this work is split into 3 tasks. One is the pathways that I'm talking to you about now. The others are around an implementation roadmap telling us when we should be deploying these measures, but also the time scales that we need to be making particular decisions. And then the final part of this is around the policy recommendations and the actions that underpin the measures. So that is really where the next steps of this work take us. It takes us into talking to our wider stakeholders and partners about the findings of this work, but also getting the input of those stakeholders into the design of those policy recommendations. We want to be very transparent. We want to be very open in how those policies are actually developed and formed. So that is really the next stages of this work, subject to combined authority approval to proceed. And we're going to do that in 2 ways. One is through sort of a policy survey that'll be going out to our partners, but it'll also be through a number of focus groups on specific sectors and with specific stakeholders as well. Just to sort of mention in that, there will be specific put my teeth back in. There will be specific sessions run for each of the LEP panels on this agenda as well, to work out what the role of each of the panels are and how they can actually feed in and tackle the climate emergency through their particular areas of work. And then to finish up on, just to mention, there is the intention to do a period of public consultation in the autumn, which goes wider than just the sort of stakeholders and partners that we'll be talking to in the co-design of the policy recommendation stage. This will be very much around getting a very wide and broad opinion into the work, judging the appetite for the measures that we have identified through the work, but also helping to inform and steer the priorities of the combined authority, the LEP, West Yorkshire local authorities as well, but the business community within West Yorkshire too. So with that, I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Noel. I guess, as with all things that we deal with in this complicated world that we now live, there is no single bullet to this, but there is every intention to drive hard the agenda towards a net zero position, and we are challenged in lots of ways to strike that balance between the environmental, the social, and the economic. So I'm going to pause there and just if anybody wants to add any comments, add any questions. Oh, sorry, Sam, you wanted to come back in. Forgive me.
I was just going to come in very briefly. So thanks to Noel for that. There are a couple of points I just wanted to make that might help colleagues or link back to something we talked about before. So certainly the matter of going to wider consultation on this, we think that's very important. Clearly having the input of civic society and transparency in all we do is important across the work of the LEP as a whole. And this agenda, because the only way that we're going to meet with success is to mobilise a true coalition of the willing and to engage people in a way that is clear, transparent, and packed full of integrity. Getting it out there to civic society when we have something coherent to say at the earliest opportunity, I think, is really important. And to that extent, also looking for more creative ways to communicate and engage. And we're going to begin to do some work, hopefully with our colleagues in the arts sector, to really begin to understand what we can learn from the skills that exist within that sector and allow what can be a complex agenda to become more addressable for people who don't spend every day thinking about it like some of us do, and really allow them to engage on that basis. So there's nothing specific to report on that yet. It was just a matter for encouragement and linking back to some comments that were made earlier on. In terms of the decarbonisation of heat, for those who've read the paper through, that's code for the hydrogen question. And so one of our agendas, one of our pathways relates to high hydrogen. And of course, we've talked about this in the past as to the really substantial economic benefits that could come from a hydrogen economy to this region and to adjacent regions, most notably to the Tees Valley and to the Humber. But that is a perfect example of something that won't get to a stop-go point unless there is a national energy policy that relates to hydrogen in that regard. And we know that our colleagues in the industry, particularly in the gas networks industries, are lobbying hard for that, but there's no certainty that that will happen. So that's why there's a potential for a real inflection point in terms of the pathways that we have available to us around government. And the other, the assumption as well is that the decisions we make help move us in the right direction. To your point, that balance between what would have in the old days be called the triple bottom line between social, environmental and economic, has always been a challenging one. But what we rely upon on this pathways work is that things contribute to move us in the right direction. And we just have to recognise that things can also move us in the other direction, and there will be consequent impacts which could be very serious on the pathways work if those decisions are taken. So when I was talking before about systems level thinking, that's really what we're talking about. Putting a lever into the system and pulling it will make things move in lots of different directions, and we need to be cognizant of that when we're talking about this. So I'll stop at that point and hand it back to you and throw it open to colleagues.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. It may be, whether in our so-called away day or otherwise, colleagues, there may be appetite for a number of people, including myself, for getting a better understanding so that we can talk in a more informed way about the totality of the challenge, rather than, in some respects, picking certain aspects of our economy that are perhaps labelled bad and everywhere else is good. Actually, as you said, there's a whole system approach required. So anybody want to come in and comment? I'll see, with Julie's help, make sure I bring everybody in who wants to come in and comment, but also ultimately want to get your endorsement for the next stage, which is the sign off, and knowing that when the Combined Authority meets later this month, it's with the support of this board, subject to it's the first of the 3 task pathways, Noel. So anybody want to come in? I'm just looking to see if I can. Cameron, I think you might want to come in. Cameron, you want to come in?
Yeah, some really exciting stuff in there, Simon. There was a question and then an offer. The question is, have you kind of considered positioning this around the Sustainable Development Goals and kind of using that as an impact metric for outcome measurement? And the other thing is we've just joined a global network. We're making the announcement on the 20th of July next week. And there's 2 programs which we're taking part in, both starting in September, Simon, and I'd be really interested in speaking to you about them. One's called Accelerate 2030, which is a global innovation competition looking for innovators that are providing solutions to some of the challenges that you've highlighted. It's backed by the UN, and we're looking at being the Bradford partner, the Yorkshire partner for that. And the second one is, if it's not on your radar, the European Union are announcing a Green Deal program, I think in September. And again, with the EU cluster within this global network that we've just joined, there's a number of priorities on that, which we're going to be looking at doing some programming around. And the work that we're developing locally, it's going to only be successful if we're working collaboratively. And for those that know the work that I've done, it's open source. We want to just invite people into the network, not be the gatekeepers. And Simon, there may be some useful links globally with you, with some of the work that's happening, especially from what I've heard in places like Colombia around the hydro energy stuff, which we've been speaking to partners with around there. So I'd be very interested to pick up a conversation about this separate outside of this with you, Simon, if that's okay.
Of course, thank you, Karen. Yeah, I'd be delighted. I'd love that, in fact. So yes, please. Let's once we get off the call, if you want to drop me an email, we'll set something up. I had absolutely heard about the Green Deal coming through from the EU, and it's it has been quite heavily promoted recently, and I think I was unaware that it was linked through to the more global piece. So that's really interesting, and yeah, so that's a very strong. Definitely, let's make that a priority. In terms of the SDGs and the way in which we communicate the agenda, we have been using. They form a currency in it, don't they? Which is translatable between different scales, different geographies, different sectors, and so on. So when we've been looking at priorities across the green economy from a strategy within that piece of work, we've certainly looked at those to find the points of connection with inclusivity, to find the points of connection around blue-green infrastructure and so on, and really understanding which of the goals we think are most addressable or within our sort of sphere of influence. Noel might correct me on this. I don't think we have overtly used them in the carbon reduction pathway work, simply because it's a somewhat binary objective. We need to get that. We need to get the position down, stay within budget, and understand what shape that pathway looks like, and make sure that all of the decisions that we take are well informed and packed full of integrity, because it is it's a somewhat linear goal in respect to the pathways work, but outside of it we have been doing, and I can share that with you a little bit more offline. Yeah, great, super.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Shirley, for your comment in the chat box. I think Joanna Robinson wanted to come in. Joanna.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree. Some really exciting work being done here. I think I just wanted to comment about the timing of the next few months is a very critical period of the shaping of the work. And I'm just a little bit concerned that the business community, we need to bring it along with us in this journey, are not going to have the appetite to get involved as much as we would like. So it was interesting that Simon said there is thinking about the communication and some creative ways to communicate, because I think that's going to be something that we absolutely need to do. We need to bring them along with us. And in the BCG meeting yesterday, as Mark mentioned earlier, at the moment, businesses are just in survival mode, and anything that's going to cost them any sort of investment is sort of off the agenda. So we need to think about how we can engage with them. I think there was a lot of positivity about it. The general feeling is that businesses do understand that there's a need, and they do want to support it. The opportunity is seen as a priority after survival and getting through this difficult period, and the generally around the table, they felt there was a lot of opportunity to capitalise on some of the positives that's come out of COVID, such as the working from home, reduced congestion, and that side of things. So I think if we can just think about how we do that, because we do need to bring them with us, and the time scale of the next few months is really the worst possible timing, I think, to bring the business community with us. So if we can just think about that.
Thank you, Joanna. That's perhaps a point for Alan and officers in marketing and comms to take offline. Certainly, I'd be very keen that we don't, we get as much engagement and involvement, but we don't necessarily overload everybody. As Joanna rightly says, as they grapple with survival rather than anything else. Does anybody else want to raise anything?
Yeah, I'd quite like to. Can I come in on Joanna's point just ever so briefly on that one?
Sure. Yeah, by all means.
Thanks. No, I think it's a point really well made, Joanna. And in different parts of my life, I'm experiencing exactly the same piece. I think the distinction between now and say 2008, 2010 is back then there was a perception that, gosh, this is too expensive for us to do. Whereas now I think there's a recognition we've kind of got a very high speed crisis in COVID, and we've got a medium to longer sort of term crisis around climate. So I think it really does come to a matter of balancing the communications to say, what we can't possibly do is press pause on addressing the climate crisis, because that's, we can't do deals with atmospheric physics. That doesn't work. What we can do, though, is be cognizant that not all organizations will be able to engage with it fully now, and that's fine. We'll welcome you when you can. Once clearly you can only contribute to change if you're there to contribute to that change, as in through the survival mode. But we can, for those who can act, and those that have got sort of the enduring long-term sort of revenue streams or regulated businesses or other forms of sort of economic stability that allow them to participate in the early phases of this, whilst others are grappling challenges that they've got in the shorter term, then I think striking that sort of balance, that we are getting on with it, but not being insensitive to the shorter term challenges that certain businesses have got is where we need to end up.
Thank you, Simon. I'm again looking to see, before fairly shortly moving on, as time moves on, if anybody else wants to come in and comment. Julie, can you see if anybody does? Sorry, I can't hear you.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Look, clearly this is job.
Roger, you've muted yourself.
I'm not sure how I did that, but anyway. Clearly this is job extremely well begun, Simon and team, but by no means not job done yet. I hope I speak for the whole board that we completely support the direction of travel that we've got to, and I know a number of us, and I include myself in that, are keen not to become experts, but to become as well informed and as rounded as we can be to help support this important part of what I describe as the equilateral triangle of success. So unless anybody has anything further to say, can we just confirm the recommendation, and we will be supportive at the combined authority meeting coming up this month. Just perhaps the odd thumbs up or so would just help me confirm that. Yes, thank you, Cameron. A quick again. Mark Roberts is smiling. I don't know if it's on freeze frame, but I'll take that as a positive. And Andrew Waller too. So thank you, Simon in particular. Thank you to officer colleagues. We're now going to move and hopefully at some pace to the remaining panel and committee reports, inclusive growth and public policy. Over to you, Shabir, I think.
Thank you, Chair. We met in June, 15th of June, and it was quite an interesting meeting because based on the national, international pandemic and the underlying causes and the kind of things that are coming out, I thought it was an ideal time to actually just encapsulate and refocus in terms of what is it we're trying to do. Because one of the things that this pandemic has shown, that there's social injustices and the health inequalities and the inequalities wider. We've seen the Black Lives Matter movement, and we've seen some form of social unrest that's taken place. And I suppose, from my point of view, the Inclusive Growth Panel is really about addressing them issues. So let's assume that we had everything in place. Would we have seen a different kind of world? Although the pandemic was around, would we have seen a different kind of variables that are playing out? And that's a big challenge. And I know you're very committed to this agenda, Roger. What I was trying to grapple for the last couple of years is, we know what we're trying to do. Nobody would disagree in terms of the overall aims and objectives, but how do we make that big impact that we're trying to make? And I think that's where the starting point was in this debate. And where we ended up was quite, from my point of view, quite informative, because there's really three aspects of what we can do in terms of support the LEP, support the local economy, support our communities, on the back of the productivity and the business aims and objectives of the LEP. People are the heart and the soul of what we're trying to do, and that's where the voluntary and community sector comes in, and the faith sectors and everything else. So there's really three key roles right here that the Inclusive and Inclusive Growth Panel can play. First is delivery. Now, from a panel, in terms of delivery, we don't really deliver anything. So we'd have a pot of money and we go off and we spend it and we come back and report. It's more nuanced than that. So what I'm saying is, in terms of delivery, in terms of how, for example, all the stuff that's taken place in previous years regarding housing market renewal fund and SRB and city challenge and all that sort of neighbourhood renewal and all that New Deal and all that sort of stuff. You know, if you go up and down the country, what is the legacy that's been left behind? It's hard to actually understand that legacy and how that's made a big impact. I think that's the starting point. And what we need to do is how we actually move forward by creating a new kind of a role, if that's the right word, for the Inclusive Growth Panel. On the back of the devolution stuff that's taking place, big opportunities. There'll be a new form of European funds that will be devolved to the Shared Prosperity Fund. So how do we actually make a big bang there? And how do we actually start to address the kind of issue that we've seen more recently? You know, and another example of that is Public Health England report, that if you are from a deprived community, twice as likely to die, and if you're from a BAME community, you're 4 times more likely to die. And it actually dovetails very well with what Cameron was saying. So that's why I said to Cameron that just park it and we'll move on when I come to my report. The other role is in terms of how we, the panel, can support the rest of the work that the panel is doing. And I think that's really something that we need to think about in terms of how the cross-cutting themes we can link into and start to make that big difference, and how we can support everybody else, and how we can actually develop inclusive growth champions within each panel. And we've heard the saying, this is not my job, it's everybody's job. You know, before myself, it was Simon who was talking about the green stuff many years ago. I understand that, you know, there's a big debate about, you know, the green stuff, but now it's probably trying to get more sort of like, you know, inherent in the day business, and that's what we're trying to do. So along with that, you know, we need to actually get a really clear action plan in terms of how we can support the work of everything else, and how the champion actually can help me deliver inclusive growth for the region. And there'll be also standards that we need to set and a monitoring role. I look at it, rather than monitoring and performance management, I look at it as a critical friend within the overall family of the LEP. You know, it's hand in glove. It's how we support each other. So data, intelligence, comprehensive data that actually informs the decision-making process. You know, around all the variables we're talking about, and how that can then move forward and start to make the big differences we need to make by being very focused and having a few shared priorities that we can actually focus on. Because the agenda is massive, I can't do it myself. at the same time, if we actually just embed this across the LEP, I think we'll start to make the big differences that we want to make. So I think I've covered the gist of the report. There's a lot of stuff in there. It's very clear to read, very self-explanatory. But we need to actually set a new pace on this inclusive growth panel agenda, and we've got some really great new members that will help me drive this forward. And I know you're very keen in driving this forward as well, Roger. Thanks. Take any questions? Did you get the question from Kate, Roger? Did you get the points that Kate left before she went?
I did. I'll just perhaps I'll get Julie to go into the chat room and I'll have a quick look.
Right, okay.
Thank you, Shabir. You're absolutely right. I think I've said on record many times that economic growth isn't the prize. It's what we do with that achievement to, and again, I'm sorry if I'm a stuck record, our challenge that the Victorians stepped up to in terms of eradicating some shocking diseases, and whilst we're in the middle of a pandemic, but our challenge is to ensure that those things that have held back our communities, whether it be fuel poverty, deprivation, etc., are things that we progressively eradicate. And I'm very keen, and essentially it harks back to our economic recovery plans. To what extent do we want to embed some social progress indices in that? And I think this is an opportunity to bring these things together. And I do agree with you and the panel that actually this is a cross-cutting thing. And indeed, a lot of things are becoming cross-cutting. The green agenda cuts right across. And it's about making sure we as a LEP community, as fleet of foot as we can be. So personally, I am very supportive, and I'm sure the board is too. But let's open it up for any other comments or questions. And hopefully on the group chat, you'll all be able to see the point that Kate made. But before addressing that, Shabir, shall we just see if there's any questions anybody or comments anybody wants to add? And I'm going to look to Julie to help me as my screen's frozen again. Julie.
Amir.
I think Amir wants to come here.
Chair.
Yeah, Amir.
Thank you, Roger. I think it's really good, and I think it's absolutely appropriate that it is embedded across all the panels. I think my concern is that doesn't necessarily mean that it gets embedded across the community. And I think at the point that I was making earlier about the fact that the LEP's reach into some of these deprived communities is very limited. And so therefore, we operate in one sphere, and a lot of the people that we're trying to reach are operating in another sphere. And when I'm looking at this from a professional capacity when we're working, is we actually look at what's happening on the ground that we could try and operationally get involved with, that would expose us to people who are in that target area. So if we were looking at, for example, GP surgeries in deprived areas, we're looking at housing associations, we're looking at schools and so on. And we know that there's these various touch points in the community that already have that reach, they already have those connections into that community, and they already have the relationships into those communities. To what extent can we start to combine some of our ambitions with things that are already happening at that sort of operational level on the ground, so that we can potentially work with GP surgeries or work with some of the schools in some of these areas that enable us to sort of try and push some of the agenda items that we're talking about here into the community in a way that we possibly would find it much harder to do independently of those existing structures. And really, there's a lot of emphasis now on co-location, but personally, I don't think that's enough. I think it actually needs to be much more integrated rather than just co-located. So I think it's almost a case of sort of understanding to what extent we can work with doctors and teachers and so on and so forth with this agenda to try and help to ensure it gets sort of deeply embedded into the community as well as across the LEP sort of panels.
Thank you, Amir. I was going to just ask Alan if he can hear me okay. I think one of the challenges, and it's not an excuse for me, one of the challenges, as with all of these things that we're coping with, is adequacy of resources to deploy and connect. But on this particular one, Alan, do you have any comments to add to Amir's very fair challenge? I wonder whether we've lost Alan. Brian, you may want to come in.
Yeah,
yeah.
Oh, I'm here.
Yeah, come in. All right.
Sorry, I lost you just a little bit near the end, but I got the gist. The answer is that when we develop the action plan to help to deliver the inclusive growth framework, which the panel has been working on, we then will need to look for some resource for it. We haven't yet identified adequate resource in this space, and we also, I think, will need to work with partners elsewhere, elsewhere in the region. So, our constituent councils do a huge amount of work in this area as well, and we'll need to look at how we can collectively maximise resource. I can see Councillor Panda wants to come in there.
Yeah, I was going to, just before I bring you in, Shabir, I think you set out in 2.4 the kind of delivery role, the support role. I guess what we perhaps could do, not now, but we could do, expand that out into kind of what, when, who, and how funded. And maybe that's something that, to your earliest point when you introduced this paper, in terms of the allocation of a budget or development and then allocation of a budget to deliver on the ground support, the like of which Amir has touched on. But anyway, over to you, Shabir.
Yeah, Amir raises a really, really good point, and to basically hit the nail on the head, we've got certain parameters that we work within the LEP and the Combined Authority. We have programs that are devolved nationally, and it's a very clear remit that we want to operate within. And then we've got a limited staff base in terms of how much we can do, and that's where what Alan mentioned at the beginning is really, really important. It's then what each constituent council does. So, say for example, in Kirklees, I chair my own inclusive growth panel, and that's where you start to actually get into the granular detail about what we're trying to do. It's difficult, but at the same time, right? What I'm trying to do here, Amir, is just to get the focus a bit different in terms of making the big impacts. It'll take time. It's not easy.
I think Shabir, it has been quite hard for this particular panel to be clear on its definition. I think you've got there now, and it's about the rest of the organisation and all of the people on this call and all of the panels, some of whom are chaired by colleagues on the call on this meeting, to try and embrace this and to Alan's point, for us to take that away. But I think would be helpful would be a kind of who, what, and how much, and what do we get? Because perhaps we'll take that offline. In the interest of time, has anybody else got any burning points that they want to raise on this before I get your support for the recommendations that are on page 40 of the papers?
I believe Shirley would like to speak, Chair.
Shirley, please come in.
Well, it was really just to say I absolutely agree that we need to relook at the remit, but there's many organisations and some large ones that are currently trying to deal with this issue of what we mean by inclusive growth. So I think in order to get to the clear action plan, it would be worth a panel maybe spending a little bit more time on actually what that means. And if I just reflect on my own organisation, we've got as our absolutely centre stage of our values is equality, diversity and inclusion. But we moving this forward in a way where we're trying to create an anti-racist organisation, and it sounds like a bit, bit of a. We feel that we're going to be really bold if we can start having those conversations about what that means as the strong lever to move us towards pushing the inclusive growth agenda even more. But everybody will be at different levels, different organisations, different sizes of organisations. So I think the supportive role is really important because everybody's at a different level.
Thank you, Shirley. As I say, in the interest of time, I'm going to move to the recommendations on page 40 which we know the report, but importantly, we agree that we will identify inclusive growth champions across all of the panels. And I guess as a rider, Alan and colleagues, together with your team, Shabir, we'll be developing what is it we can do, how do we fund it, and how do we get on with it. So are people happy to endorse the recommendations 8.1, 8.2 on page 40? Please, just a quick thumbs up will be helpful. As I say, my screen's, yeah, fine, that's great. Okay, we'll move on. Melanie, the paper on capital programme is very clear. It sets out where we are. It might be useful just to share with colleagues our success on the Getting Building programme, but also how that dovetails in with the third of the 20+ million that we've had, not uniquely, but every LEP's had withheld as part of a project appraisal in this last year of the Local Growth Fund. And I guess the board will want to just get reassurance that we're not going to be handing any money back. But anyway, over to you to make any additional points before I open up for some questions. We've got two other substantive items to get through before my deadline of 3:30. So over to you, Melanie.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We're in our final year now of Growth Deal, and government have withheld a proportion of funding for all LEPs, and they are undertaking a review. So the end of last month, we had to submit our expected positions at year end. We had to confirm which projects were going to start when they were going to be in contract, what was going to be spent by the end of March. And I think it's pretty clear that there is a sharp cut-off date of the 31st of March. So we need to be in contract on our projects, and we need to conclude the spend by the 31st of March. We have until March 24 to report all the outputs. But obviously, we are trying to maximise that spend within our final year of the programme. Now, at the current forecast, we are looking like the economic schemes are tracking at about £1 million overspend. And at the moment, the Transport Fund is tracking slightly under. Now, Transport Fund is a longer programme and runs for 10 years. So it's a slightly different issue with the funding. And we understand from our government colleagues that the allocation to Transport Fund will still be paid this year because it is a longer term programme. And at the moment, in terms of the economic, we are forecasting a slight overspend, which hopefully at year end we can manage, and it will be as close as we can get to that actual grant award. So that's one thing that's going on in terms of the review of the existing programme. And government also launched the Getting Building Fund, and they asked us to submit within a week a series of shovel-ready schemes. So they were submitted a couple of weeks ago. We've had ongoing discussions with government colleagues on our shortlist, and basically we are putting forward the schemes that, first of all, have to be complete by March 22, which is an extra 12 months, but it's still an enormous pressure for trying to get some brand new schemes off the ground. So deliverability is one factor. They're also looking at strategic fit, and they want to see new jobs and clean growth. So we're looking at those aspects as well. And they need to see additionality of outputs. So they definitely want to judge that as a separate programme with a separate raft of outputs and benefits. So we have to submit that on Thursday. It's a very, very tight deadline, but they're expecting the schemes to be ready to go pretty much. And therefore, they haven't given us very long to do that. And we should hear by September exactly which ones are in that list.
Thank you, Melanie. I think the important point on these new schemes is to share with board colleagues that we submitted 3 levels of bid: Core, Core Plus, and Core Plus Plus. One was just, the final one was, let's think of all the things we can think of and let's put them down. But I'm delighted to say that the award that we've received, which Melanie just mentioned, we're going to agree the specifics, was more than the core. So and even the core we thought was a bit ambitious. I think another broader point to share with you, the £900 million fund that this is part of, the wider north and the 11 LEPs across the north have been allocated just a shade under 40% of the whole of that amount that's being made available for England. So let's hope that's a portent to the future in terms of the proportionality of awards. Unless I've got this wrong, Melanie, I think we all firmly believe when it comes to the economic projects that we won't be handing any money back so long as we make sure everything's as contracted as we can. And as you rightly say, the transport fund, we're 6 years down a 20-year fund, so there are another 14 years left, having successfully passed through the 2019 Gateway Review. I think the paper's self-evident, but if there are any particular questions anybody wanted to make, and also I would be interested if our senior sponsor from the centre, Peter, wanted to comment. Doesn't have to if you wanted to comment on where we've got to. And I'm not suggesting we should pat ourselves on the back, but we should take some time to reflect that from a standing start only a few years ago, it seems like a lifetime ago to some of us, but only a few years ago, just how far we've come. And we see it in the buildings, in FE colleges, the innovation buildings that have been developed, etc., not least of which the money that we've supported SMEs throughout the period following the launch of the growth service. So I'll just see if anybody wants to comment. Again, Julie, my screen's frozen, so if you could help me. And as I said, Peter, if you wanted to comment, you'd be welcome to do so, but there's no necessity, obviously. Julie, anybody want to comment or ask me questions?
I don't believe so, Chair.
Okay. So on the basis that we've got it before us, and I'm not sure it's in the public domain. Well, it is in the public domain. We've secured in excess of another £50 million, I think, additional, and I'm hoping that a chunk of that's going to go into the business growth programme to continue our support for SMEs, as has been touched on the early part of this meeting. So can we just again get a thumbs up for the recommendations on page 45, which is basically for us to note where we are and the update on those deals. So again, I'll look around. Yeah, we've got some, so that's fine. Thank you. Moving on now. Hopefully we're in the home straight. Alan, are you going to lead on this digital board paper? Again, let's assume the paper has been read. Perhaps you'll pick up some key points before we invite some comments and any discussion points. Alan.
Well, okay, assuming that it's been read, and just to point out that Andrew, right, as a member of the board, may want to say something as well. The key points are: we've carried out a review of the way that the digital board has been operating. We want to strengthen it to ensure that its activity is really influential across all of the panels, and that there are strong links in between its work and the panel's work. This is clearly an area for growth, and we talked about economic recovery earlier. One of the specific kind of regional specific asks that we want to make to government is around the digital agenda. There's a huge amount of work that we could do here in supporting inclusive growth in terms of extending out 100% digital activity through the region, more in terms of digital infrastructure, digital as a device for to support the climate emergency and so on. So the paper is pretty straightforward in that respect. The other thing that I'd mention is that as part of the devolution deal, we received a bit of funding to set up a digital skills partnership, which is about bringing together people to improve digital skills, both demand for and supply of them through the region, to identify barriers and knock them down and create further opportunities. So this paper gives a bit of information about that as well. Happy to take any questions on it, and also I've got Sarah Bowes has joined the meeting as well, who's the lead officer on this work.
Thank you, Alan. Any comments? I'm pleased to see that, you know, across the LEP panels and the LEP board, we're well involved in this agenda, but we need, as you say, get our additional focus. Anybody want to comment?
Helen and Amir have raised hand, Chair.
Sorry, who was it? Amir?
Helen and Amir and Peter Mucklow.
Okay, well, let's go to Helen first, then Amir, then Peter. Helen.
I just wanted to say thank you for this report, because I found it really comprehensive and I think it's so important. And obviously we've flagged before some of the issues that this pandemic has thrown up for digital infrastructure and home working, etc. But I think this is a really such an important agenda going forwards. And I thought the report was excellent. So just thank you for that.
Thank you, Helen. And actually, just to share, maybe we'll take it offline, Alan. It's not normal for the chair of the LEP to be involved in any particular topic area, but I think this is one where I'd certainly like to be more closely informed about it, and perhaps we'll discuss that later. Amir, Peter, and I think Shirley then. Amir.
Sorry, yeah, I thought it was a really good report. I think the issue of the digital divide is one that I think is very real. And I think in terms of BAME and I think small SMEs, I wasn't sure where the representation was in terms of the reach of those within the makeup of participants of the people that are involved in it, and to what extent do we have whether they are providers, you know, company providers that are operating at that level that we could incorporate within the mix of people that we're hearing from. I wasn't entirely sure that it was being covered.
Do you want me to answer that, Roger?
Sorry, yes, please come in.
So we have got SME representation on the board. We've got from digital sector businesses, but also non-digital sector businesses, so manufacturers, for example. Diversity is an issue, and it is something that I want to strengthen as part of looking at this review and getting increased membership on the board. So maybe I could pick up with you and me after this.
Okay, thank you. Who was next? I think it was Peter. Was it Peter you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thanks very much, Roger. I think, I mean, the last item showed, in a sense, the achievement and prowess of the LEP of the region in respect to, if you like, you know, physical bricks and mortar. But you know, this one is you know, obviously now as important. We've got, you know, so many elements to this. All the prioritisation sort of bets that we make in central government. You know, digital is always the sort of banker, because there's so many elements to it. The digital services that we all now consume, the design of those digital services by those who produce and offer them. You know, digital working, as we are doing here today, digital skills that are needed in so many occupations now and so many sectors, which you might not associate with digital forms of delivery and digital literacy for inclusion. So yeah, absolutely, yeah, support the organisational sort of renewal in here. But you know, like you, Roger, I feel you know, we on the board probably ought to be seeing more of this in future, and being able to input it on it from a whole range of perspectives. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Shirley.
I think Brian's answered my question in the chat box there about the research and looking at the index of deprivation. So I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. Simon Pringle, I think you've indicated.
Thanks, Roger. Yeah, it was more of an observation than anything else, and just really to draw attention to the interplay between the decarbonisation agenda and the digital economy, which is a classic example of the double-edged sword, really. Rashik and I have talked about this at some length, as how that connects through into the skills agenda, but the potential for certain communities to find employment either digitised or decarbonised out of existence, whereas others find a huge amount of potential opportunity from both of those agendas working together is clearly there. And I think both when we consider it in the context of our pathways, but also the just transition or the inclusive growth agenda, it's something that we really just need to keep our eye on. And to that end, I'll be glad to contribute in whatever constructive way I can to the work.
Thank you, Sam. Before I bring in Andrew, I guess to reflect what Peter said, in today's world, 1,000 years ago, water and food and fire might have been key to our survival and let alone our development. But I guess digital and connectivity is fundamental, and I guess we need to be well on the front foot of that. So thank you, Simon. Andrew Wright, did you want to come in and have the last word on this before perhaps subject to anybody else with a burning point, we just look at the recommendations?
Okay, yes, good, thank you. And thanks for the airtime that the board is getting, the digital board is getting now. It's part of our intention that it should feel at least as significant as it has done in the past. And thank you for signalling your extra interest, Roger, and the various contributions where people really are recognising it. Alan mentioned that we've got the member of staff starting for the local digital skills partnership. We didn't yet mention today that it also has the Made Smarter board reporting to it as well, which is some important work on automation, artificial intelligence, Industry 4.0, big data, all sorts of stuff, which is quite compelling and needs to be brought before this board from time to time in a timely way. I thought I'd just end by saying that that it is a very lively session. There's 25 people or so who attend it, and it does have some good diversity. And as a result of that, and it is definitely gaining in significance. And we were delighted to have Andy Carter from Whitehall attend virtually our last meeting. And he's the person who's procuring the next rollout of broadband across the country now. And we were, he was asking us what we thought, and we were able to give direct input as to how important it was to look at the rural situation, for example, and the particularly challenging geography of West Yorkshire, and the need for extra resources for us. And that felt a nice use of the fact that this body is picking up momentum. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm just smiling to myself, having spent a few days on the North Yorkshire coast last weekend, where we're blessed to have super fast broadband to our home there, that actually digital connectivity by the seaside was a damn sight better than it has been, as I say, in downtown round here, in the heart of the urban jungle. But anyway, that's just an interesting anecdote. Assuming there are no further comments anybody wishes to make, Julie, can we just check?
Don't believe so, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Can we just then, the recommendations 8.1 through 8.3 on page 52, can we, in the usual manner, can I invite some thumbs up? Thank you, Councillor Waller and Mandy and others. We're now on the home straight at 3:15. I think we're going to come to you, Brian, on this paper, which seeks an approval to deploy some funding once we've considered the contents of this revised project plan. Is that correct, Brian?
That is correct, yes, Chairman, yeah. Would you like me
Anything
to...
you want to add? Anything you want to add, and particularly around the funding request and the fact it's about matching from recycled funds that we've successfully deployed, whereas in other parts of the country they gave it away once. We decided we weren't that generous.
That's absolutely right, Chairman. We don't want to give any money back to the government. We want to get as much out there to our businesses as possible. Just some background to this. We ran a programme called Strategic Business Growth 1, and that provided intensive assistance to 350 businesses across the patch. And that was specialist consultancy, capital grant support, and so on. And that support delivered 820 new jobs. I think £81 million worth of export turnover from some of the assisted businesses was achieved, as well as quite a substantial increase in turnover and gross value added. After the evaluation, because of the success of the programme, we decided to run a phase 2 programme. So we bid for some European funding, and we secured 1.6 million for phase 2. Now, as a condition of the European funding, we need to provide some matching contribution, either from the private sector or from elsewhere. So the first ask was to be able to use some of this recycled funding, 300,000, as matching to enable us to spend the 1.6 for phase 2 to run a second programme. And the second programme, I think the number of businesses assisted was around 500. So the ask is for the board to endorse and approve the recycle funding being used as matching. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing I wanted to do is just highlight the work that was done pre-COVID by Deloitte to look at setting up a commercial investment fund. Now, obviously, in the light of COVID, the government have announced various loan schemes and rescue packages. So it now seems appropriate to look at re-engaging Deloitte, to look at the market, to see how it's changed, and to see whether or not there's an opportunity to invest in a new loan fund, a commercial loan fund, to support businesses across the region. Now, of course, what we don't want to do is compete unfairly against the private sector using taxpayers' money. This is actually about additionality, where there are gaps in the market, and whether or not we should set up a commercial fund to invest in our local businesses. So that's just to bring members up to date. I'm happy to take questions. Hopefully that's clear.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I think you're absolutely right. We want this to be additional, not conflicting, and at the very least complementary to the likes of NPIF, for example, as well. But what we have seen, and we've had a couple of approaches from people looking to support SME growth and those other things in our part of the world, and it was a question whether we might use this fund either standalone or in part matching with others, private sector sources of funding, but that, I guess, to be decided. So any questions, comments from anybody? And again, Julie, please can you assist me because my screen's gone rather frozen.
Amir has his hand up, Chair.
Amir.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say, I remember the original report that Deloitte did, which seemed to indicate that the biggest issue regarding sort of funding to businesses was the fact that we appear to have under the required amount of sort of angel investors and capital investors coming into this region compared to the south of England. And it struck me at the time then that, you know, the real issue was that we haven't got enough of the private sector involved in this region. And if we are going to lend, I was looking at something that the London mayor did when the deputy mayor came up, and he was telling us about a fund that they involve in where they put £1 in 7, match funded with a whole series of angel investors, and obviously they set the threshold for the kind of businesses, and really whether that sort of feeds into our entrepreneurialism and sort of puts us really at the heart of convening the right mix of external investors and using that as leverage rather than directly lending ourselves as a primary lender. I think that was one point, and the other one was just in relation to the point about it appeared to suggest that there was an idea of investing in real estate, and I wasn't sure whether that was sort of essentially becoming landlords or quite what that referred to, but I'd be concerned if that was the case. But yeah, if I could just sort of 2 points.
Thank you, Amir. Are you able to address those, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of the point around investing in commercial real estate, I think part of the Deloitte's work, if you like, if we engage them on phase 3 of this project, is to look at the market and look at the risks with the current lending market. And then what we would look to do is come back to the board with a series of options, you know, just to determine which will be you know, most feasible and acceptable, and to deliver the best return on, you know, on the taxpayer's investment. Now, it may be that commercial real estate, that the market is too risky, but there might be an opportunity for us to co-invest alongside other, say, business angels or venture capital providers to facilitate a development that might not otherwise go ahead without some public sector intervention. So all of those options would be considered in the round as part of the Deloitte's work.
I think, Brian, if I may, for EMEA's benefit, go back to the origins of where this recycled money has come from. It was called the Growing Places Fund back in 2012, and it was about supporting stalled real estate and related investment projects. I'm not suggesting that I advocate that, but that was what its origins were, and we're obviously not discounting it, but not necessarily going to be focusing in on it, and hopefully that gives you some reassurance. As regards Amir's his first point, did you want to answer that?
Sorry, just remind me what the first point was. Sorry, Amir.
It was really just to do with how Deloitte's the angel investors and the venture capital funds, whether the fact that we don't have enough of those in the region, that's what the report seemed to suggest when I remember reading back to it. And actually, how can we facilitate that by using this money as match fund to get more of that sort of venture capital fund into the region?
Yeah, I think part of the, if you like, phase 3 of the work will be to look at, whether there is an equity gap, and that whole market comparator refresh will look at the current funding landscape and whether there's any gaps and what the balance is between debt and equity finance. And obviously that will take in the round some of the work that the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund are doing, current loan products. Are there any particular gaps that need to be addressed? So that work does need to be done. I think that's a really good point. And how do we make the connections between angel investors, traditional venture capital organisations, and then that leads on to another discussion and debate around our core capabilities as a LEP and combined authority. Do we have that core capability and expertise in house, for example, to run a loan and venture capital fund, or would we look to outsource the management of that to a fund manager? And I think all of those options need to be considered in the round, together with the kind of risks and and opportunities that presents. If I may just come back to the final ask, is obviously to seek views on the strategic business growth programme and the opportunity to use £300,000 of that as matching for the European project, strategic business growth.
Chair,
Sorry.
Chair, I believe you're on mute. Roger. And I think Andrew may wish to. I think he's got his hand raised.
Did you have any points, Andrew, to come in?
No, if that's me, I'm not sure whether you mean me or Councillor Waller, but I certainly support what's being said, and I would like to have the money for the growth fund, of course, please.
Yep, I'm gonna say that we are supportive, and if anybody wants to dissent, perhaps you could indicate so that Julie can see that you do dissent. Otherwise, I'd like it to be that we are supportive of the recommendations, and particularly the match funding. Are we checking, Julie, that anybody's dissenting from that?
Everybody's happy, Chair.
Good. Okay. Thank you for that. I think we've now concluded agenda items 1 to 9. 10 is for information, the minutes of the last CA meeting, and 11, which is builders are meeting to start at 12 and away day. I guess we don't know how we will construct this, but maybe I could just put maybe officers offline. We can discuss whether we might start slightly earlier than 12 and get the formal business of the board out of the way, have a brief break, and then have the away day. Now, there's always a danger when you have a break that you lose people, but I think there'll be quite a lot of things to debate and discuss, not least of which inclusive growth, the recovery plan, the green agenda, and the pathway workings. So perhaps we can take that offline, but I'll just share, colleagues, that was what was in my head, so as to allow full and and enable discussion, which might have to be done via digitally rather than in person. So unless anybody else has got anything to raise, and I'm going to look to Alan and Ben as to where, and Peter, I will bring very shortly the meeting to a close. But Alan looks like he might be about to say something. Alan.
Well, it was just to mention that you may remember that last year there was a new requirement that we have a public question time as part of the transparency of the board. And we operated that last year. We're going to need to think about how that might operate in some way at the away day. I just thought I'd mention that the AGM. So yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, perhaps we, as I say, we can do that.
Yeah, we'll come up with some suggestions.
Ben, did you want to add anything? No need. And also Peter. Ben, you want to come in?
All fine, thank you.
Okay. Peter, anything you wanted to add?
Nothing further from me, thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, look, thank you, everybody. Great to have you with us, Peter, but also all of the LEP board and the officers and others that are listening in. I hope you found that interesting and informative. And I hope, like Family Marsh, people get some real time off to enjoy the summer. And I don't like the stay safe, stay alert. I prefer stay bright because it covers all circumstances and eventualities. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the summer, and I look forward to seeing you, and I hope in person rather than across the airwaves come September. So thank you and good night. I think we can stop live streaming now, Khalid. Thank you.